What's up, guys and girls? How we doing? Happy Wednesday. We have our video lesson of the day here, and today we're going to cover a big topic, really. We're going to cover Westward Expansion. Basically, we're going to look at, 50 to 60 years of territorial expansion for the United States. Before I get into the lesson, I want to show you the worksheet that goes with it. So in OneNote, this is handout number 3 in the sectionalism folder. You will notice that most of the handout is based on maps. For each map, there are a couple questions that goes with the map. So you have a map with questions on the Missouri Compromise, the Indian Removal Act, the Texas Revolution. When you get to this map, the questions got bumped to page 2 or the next page. So don't miss all 3 of those questions that go with the Texas Revolution. The Mexican-American War. Again, the questions got bumped to the next page. And then the last page, you have, like, fill in the blanks. It's 10 questions about all the different U.S. territories that we're going to cover in the lesson. So let's get started. All right, the lesson begins with talking about Westward Expansion. All right, you can see the map in the background there. We're going to talk about all of those territories today and how this belief in a manifest destiny led to America's westward expansion. So let's begin with, talk about what manifest destiny was all about. Beginning with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, America started to realize they felt it was their destiny. Americans begin to feel like it is our right to expand west. And the Louisiana Purchase begins this, and then the Lewis and Clark expedition really highlights this desire to reach the Pacific, to use both coasts for trade, and manifest destiny. And I want to write out the definition. Manifest destiny. Manifest destiny becomes the belief it was the U.S. God-given right to expand west. So think about it. Was it our God-given right to expand west? No. Were there other people living on that land in the west? Yes. Who's out there on that land in the west that we think is entitled to us? Who's living on the land out here and even here? What different European nations owned that land at the time? What other groups of people are living on the land at that time? The United States government really comes up with this theory that it's our God-given right to justify their actions over the next 50 or 60 years. We're going to go to war with Mexico. We're going to have problems with Spain and Britain. We're going to take a lot of land from Native Americans. And we always justified it by saying, it's our destiny. From sea to shining sea, this continent is supposed to be ours. Now, the Louisiana Purchase began this, and hopefully you remember we covered the Louisiana Purchase just a few weeks ago. In the Louisiana Purchase, the United States signed a treaty with France, meaning a formal agreement between the United States and France. My picture on the right there shows Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, and Napoleon Bonaparte, the leader of France. They didn't shake hands in person, but their ambassadors did. And this purchase shows us one way that we can acquire land. The United States literally bought land from France through a treaty. And that's going to be one of the themes of our lesson today. As we talk about all the different pieces of westward expansion, we're also going to look at the different ways the country has acquired the land. So that's why I highlighted it green. Each time we learn a new way that we can acquire land, it'll be a new key term that's highlighted green. All right. More review. We just covered the Missouri Compromise over the last week or two. The Missouri Compromise is another key point in the Westward Expansion because it highlights some of the issues that come up when new states are added to the Union. In this case, hopefully you remember that the major conflict here has to do with the fact that you're going to have free and slave states. And the United States had that perfect balance at the time where there were 11 slave states and there were 11 free states. And when Missouri was ready to be added to the Union, I'm going to make a big question mark. All right, when Missouri was ready to be added to the Union, they were worried about upsetting that balance of 11 free states and 11 slave states. So they come up with this compromise where they will also add Maine. Maine is up here in the Northeast. It balances out the number of free states and slave states. One key thing, and I'm pretty sure this is an answer to a question on your worksheet, it did not solve the problem. The bigger issue is slavery. Are our states and our country going to be free or slave? The Missouri Compromise does not solve the bigger issue, should we have slavery. Instead, they literally divide the country, and their plan is that in the future, north of that line, the 3630 line will be free, south of that line will be slave territory. So this just kind of highlights the issues that come up with Westward Expansion. Yes, it sounds awesome to expand west. Yes, it's always great to add new land, but then you're going to have issues on that new land. The question is always going to come up, will this land allow slavery? The Missouri Compromise does not answer that question. It leads to future problems. All right. And just to kind of summarize, our history of adding new states, in 1783, after we won the Revolutionary War, that was the United States. 13 states, the same 13 original colonies. Our border was basically the Appalachian Mountains. The United States did add territory on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, but it was not states yet. Our new government made it possible to add new states. So as we expand west, you can see here all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. As we move west, it is possible to add new states to the Union. So basically, in this video, we're going to cover how we acquired all the land, except for Alaska and Hawaii, that makes up the first 48 states. All right, some new information. Just the other day, we talked about Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. This is another important theme throughout Westward Expansion because all the land that we are moving on to, there was Native Americans living on that land. So in 1830, President Andrew Jackson helps get this law passed in Congress. And the Indian Removal Act is very controversial. It is basically a forced removal, spearheaded by the United States military, of Native Americans off their homeland. You're basically looking at 5 large tribes: the Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, and the Choctaw. And these 5 large tribes in the Southeast are systematically removed from their homes, removed from their tribal lands, and forced to travel out west. It was a sad time. The Trail of Tears is the famous route taken by some of these tribes because it was deadly. The weather, the harsh conditions, the lack of food. The young and the old really struggled on this journey across the Southeast as they were being brought to the new land that they were moving out to, which is present-day Oklahoma. And so a lot of the Native Americans that were on these trails heading west, a lot of them didn't make it. One cool thing that students always ask me about, so I want to point it out now, not all Native American tribes traveled by land as they were moved out west. You can see on my map, the Seminole tribe leaving Florida traveled by boat. And they were brought into the port of New Orleans, and then, they traveled up the Mississippi River to the Oklahoma Territory. But, in summary, Andrew Jackson's support of this law was very controversial, and he didn't care. Jackson, like I said, was stubborn and, had his enemies, and he felt that land was better suited for American settlers to live on. So the Native Americans are removed. And again, as I talk about Westward Expansion and Manifest Destiny, we have to talk about the Native Americans, because as we expand west during the 1800s, Native Americans are going to continue to lose their land. All right, so that brings us to some new stuff. All right. Texas is one of the most interesting Westward Expansion stories. I would say Texas and California are the two states that students are always most interested in. So the history of Texas really is pretty cool. In 1836, there were a lot of U.S. settlers that had moved into Texas. Most of the U.S. settlers that were living in Texas were in the eastern part of the state. You do not recognize the full shape of the state of Texas in that little purple section that I highlighted. These settlers were farmers that had moved from states like Louisiana and Alabama out to Texas's most fertile land. This portion of Texas is very fertile, and it's great for farming. Most of these farmers were growing cotton in this territory that was owned by Mexico. So you can start to see why there's going to be problems. In 1836, Mexico's government announces that they are banning slavery. And so for the Americans who moved to Texas to grow cotton, Mexico banning slavery is the worst news possible. So a revolution begins, and on my map you can see all the little highlights of where some of the key battles were fought during the Texas Revolution. A revolution is fought between the American settlers living in Texas and the Mexican government. This is where the famous Battle of the Alamo takes place. That was a siege of a religious mission, or basically like a fort built by the Texans at the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, and it didn't go well. The Mexican army slaughtered the Texans that were holding down the fort at the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, and it becomes like a rallying cry or slogan for the Texans during this revolution against the Mexican government. Remember the Alamo. Remember Goliad. They go on and win the Texas Revolution. And one of the coolest stories of any state in the U.S., Texas becomes an independent country, an independent republic for 10 years. So think about what that means. The Lone Star State. The Lone Star State was called the Lone Star State because for 10 years, Texas was an independent country between 1836 and 1845. All throughout that time, Texas wanted to be added or annexed into the United States. I want you to think to yourself, why do you think the United States was worried about adding Texas? What would be the negative impact? What would be the effect if we add Texas, who just broke away from Mexico? Who's going to be upset with us, the United States government? Of course, Mexico. The United States realize that if we add Texas, Mexico is going to be unhappy. It does eventually happen anyway. All right. In 1845, the United States government annexes Texas into our union. All right. Annexing, or an annexation, is an addition of land. But this is an interesting one, because when you annex land, the land that you are adding wants to become part of your country. Not all of the land that we have added over the years wanted to become part of the United States. Texas did. And they waited patiently for almost 10 years. Finally, in 1845, When Texas is annexed into the United States, Mexico becomes extremely unhappy with the United States government, and it's going to lead to war between the United States and Mexico. So let's move on and talk about that war. All right. Texas was added in 1845. By 1846, problems begin between the United States government and Mexico. Now, on this map, you see the red highlighting the Texas Republic from 1836 to 1845. So I'll highlight it in green so it stands out. The yellow land is the land that was disputed. And so I want you to think that both Mexico, green for Mexico on this map, and the United States, blue for the United States, both countries were saying that that yellow territory in between was theirs. In April 1846, U.S. troops clashed with Mexican troops near the Rio Grande River. Now, the Rio Grande, I'm going to use the blue highlighter. The Rio Grande is the river that gives Texas its famous shape today. That river was what the Texans and the Americans thought the border between Texas and Mexico should be. The Mexican government, so there's two rivers you got to remember here. The first one is the Rio Grande, or Rio Grande. The Mexican government always felt that the border between Texas and the United States should be that river, which was called the Nueces River. The Nueces River. And so in between those two rivers is that disputed territory, which eventually leads to the war. In May of 1846, the United States declares war on Mexico. And it's a real war. We actually declared war on Mexico and fought them for almost 2 years. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. Not only does the prize become the disputed territory between Texas and Mexico, but right away Americans start setting their sights on all of Mexico's land, including California. What better piece of land than California? And so around that time, around 1846, the settlers living in California begin fighting with the Mexican government. So we send troops there. In March of 1847, we invaded Mexico City. All right. And by September 1847, the war was over. Mexico surrenders. The treaty ending the war is known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And basically, the result of this war is that we won a huge chunk of Mexico's land. Not all of Mexico. Obviously, you know that Mexico still exists today. But it's all of this land north of what we consider the border today that we won from Mexico. And we're going to talk about the next way you can acquire land on the next slide. Let's go here first. A cession. All right. So if you look on my map here, this huge red chunk is all the land we took from Mexico as a result of defeating them in the war. Not only did we add all of that disputed territory in Texas, we basically took from them California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, part of Colorado, part of New Mexico. So a cession is another way you can add land. To win land or to be given land, you are ceded land as a result of a war. Now, before we finish up, we got to talk about California. Right around the time that the United States adds Texas and wins the war with Mexico, gold is discovered in California. So this new U.S. territory way out west has never been more valuable because of the gold rush. That is the border of present-day California. You see on this map all of the famous trails that settlers used to rush out west. Famous trails like the Oregon Trail, which brought people to the Oregon country. Famous trails like the California Trail and the Donner Pass that was used to bring people into present-day California, the old Spanish Trail, which leads to present-day Los Angeles, the Santa Fe Trail, the Mormon Trail. These prospectors, these miners, rushed out west because of gold discoveries all throughout the hills, mountains, and plateaus west of the Rocky Mountains. It's really the birth of America's western states. California is the one that we most associate with the gold rush of 1849, but Oregon was also really affected by this westward movement. All right, the famous Oregon Trail is a really cool part of United States history, and that Oregon country, so I'll show you a different map in a moment, was really rich in resources. Hunters are trapping beavers in Oregon, and, wilderness men are going out there and chopping down trees and shipping back lumber. So the Oregon country was really rich in resources besides gold, and it was an attractive place for people to, move out to and stay. Now this map, let me clean up the map a little bit so that you can see it clean. This map kind of highlights or shows all of the different territories that were added to the United States during this time. The Oregon country was added in 1846, right around the same time that we were in that war with Mexico. The Oregon country was added in a treaty with Great Britain. Now, there are a few other, I can't erase the pen markings, I apologize. There are a few other random territories that we need to talk about quickly, one of which, let me use pink, is this guy down here, the Gadsden Purchase. In 1853, the United States purchased that little strip of land because we were completing a railroad that went from Texas to California. And so that little chunk of land in southern Arizona and New Mexico was called the Gadsden Purchase. There's other little chunks that you see we've acquired over the years, like this piece of present-day Montana that was ceded back to Britain, or this piece of present-day Michigan that we got from Britain, the northern tip of Maine, obviously the acquisition of Florida. So there's lots of little pieces of the United States puzzle that we've acquired from Britain and Spain over the years. The big chunks, number one, the original 13 colonies and the territory to the Mississippi. Number two, the Louisiana Purchase. Number three, Florida. And then kind of in order, Texas, California, and the rest of the Mexican Cession, the Oregon country, and then finally down here on the southwest, the Gadsden Purchase. So those, 6 or 7 puzzle pieces kind of put together the puzzle that is the present-day United States. Now, the two pieces that we don't learn about in 7th grade are Alaska and Hawaii. Both are not connected to the original United States, and both were acquired later, late 1800s and early 1900s. So that kind of sums up our Westward Expansion. I don't want to call it a unit because it's a one-day video, but that kind of sums up Westward Expansion. Your job, if you are not doing it while you watched, is to now go through these questions that match with the maps. Pause my video as I cover each topic. I'm pretty sure I answered just about every question. All right. When you get to this little fill in the blanks, don't stress if you miss one or two. There's 10 different questions. If you like to color, you could color your map to kind of match the map that I just showed you at the end of the video. All right. Have a great day. Hope you enjoyed our quick little talk about Westward Expansion and the gold rush. We will talk next on Friday when we have our Friday check-in. This assignment, you have 2 days to complete. So today's Wednesday. You have all day today, all day Thursday, and then Friday we'll have our normal check-in. So have a great day. Get outside, enjoy some weather, get some sun, and I